Hello, and welcome to this latest podcast from NTT Data, where we explore the newest trends and technologies that are transforming industries around the world. I'm your host, Daniel Harrington, and today we're exploring the future of banking. In particular, we're seeing how generative AI is changing the way that financial institutions operate on a day-to-day basis. Generative AI, or Gen AI, made waves and splashed across headlines across the world following the release of ChatGPT in November 2022. Now, nearly 2 years later, Gen AI is enabling banks to operate more intelligently and with greater precision. According to recent research conducted by NTT Data, adoption of Gen AI in the banking sector has risen from 45% last year to 58% today. That's a pretty impressive rise for a technology that only captured international attention 2 years ago. So, what does this all mean for the future of banking? How can AI not only solve today's problems, but also unlock new opportunities for growth and security? To help us unpack these questions, we're delighted to have Jason Gandy here with us today. Jason is Senior Vice President in Financial Services and Insurance at NTT Data and a seasoned expert in leveraging technology to drive innovation in the financial services industry. Jason, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Before we get into the specifics, could you start by telling our listeners a little bit about your background and the work you're doing at NTT Data?
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Dan, and thanks for having me. This should be a fun discussion today. So as you said, I'm Jason Gandy. I lead our FSI consulting business for NTT Data. My background is over the last 25 plus years, I've been working with banks and financial institutions to transform their business using technology. And I've worked across a lot of the large and mid-sized organizations because what we're talking about here with generative AI really applies to firms of all sizes. So I've been really fortunate over this time to be part of the digital evolution in banks that's taken place over the last 20 years. And we've helped these organizations with new operating models, customer experiences, efficiencies, as well as product launches. And the other thing I would say is, while we're using the term banking today, it really includes the banks, the wealth managers, payment firms, fintechs, really the entirety of the banking and the financial services ecosystem. So, and then what I'm doing today, here at NTT Data, I've got the privilege to lead a large team of industry and technology consultants who are helping shape the direction and the next wave of change that's occurring at these organizations. So NTT Data is a top 3 IT services provider for banking and financial services globally. Our team's got an enormous wealth of resources behind us that we can bring to bear as we're advising and executing these clients on new solutions to meet their goals.
That was pretty exciting stuff. And talking about the next wave of innovation and your first-hand experience with banking, we're so glad you had the time to join us today. So, I guess diving into things, looking at your first-hand experience with Gen AI in banks, what is your experience in terms of how they're implementing it, how banks are looking at it as an opportunity and kind of an enabler for future growth? Is the implementation as widespread as NTT Data's research suggests?
Yeah, I think my firsthand experience, it really does align well with the research. The research shows that almost all the banks, so about an impressive 97% of them, have at least reported adopting a Gen AI strategy. But the depth of the actual implementation is still really evolving. If we looked at maybe a trend from what we saw last year, probably 25-30% of the financial institutions had fully integrated Gen AI into core operations. Probably about 70% of those applications really remained in pilot phases, or they were limited to use cases like chatbots or enhancing fraud detection. This year in 2024, the pace has just accelerated really rapidly. Major banks have invested heavily in technology this year, with a significant chunk of that in AI. That said, scaling these AI initiatives from being experimental projects to being really robust enterprise-wide solutions is still challenging for a lot due to regulatory hurdles as well as dependencies on their legacy systems. This means that while the research and all the strategic planning around Gen AI is really widespread, I think we're just scratching the surface of what it can really do and all the value that's going to unlock. So that's what we're seeing right now.
Definitely, and I'm struck by something you said about how how so many of the applications that we see today are still in the pilot phases or perhaps limited use cases. We've seen it in customer experience and fraud detection and areas like that. Do you think there's an extent to which other banks are seeing some of these trial cases, seeing other banks put it into action, and thinking, we can definitely see the business case for this, and that kind of, I guess, publicity in itself creating more appetite for adoption?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some of that peer pressure that's going on. And in all cases, success often breeds success, right? So when they start to see the real results that are happening, they recognize that if they don't quickly adopt this technology, they're going to get left behind and be obsolete in some cases.
Definitely, and I think, again, the stat that we cited earlier about 97% of banks adopting AI is such a staggeringly huge number, and I think similarly high was the number of banks, I believe the figure is 96%, where the Gen AI strategy is being led directly from the C-suite downwards. And again, I want to refer to your experience here to kind of put a face to the numbers. In your experience, why are the top leadership teams at these banks so interested in Gen AI as a
Yeah,
technology?
you're right that I think it's top down mandate that the banks are going to be adopting this, and so the top leadership teams at the banks are really highly invested in generative AI because it offers such
Hmm.
substantial opportunities to enhance both the efficiency of the banks, but also drive growth. So, as an example, AI driven automation can reduce operational costs by 10 to 25% across various functions, including customer service and back office operations. So, in a world where we've seen a lot of focus on cost and efficiency at the banks over the last couple of years, this is really unlocking a lot of value in that space. Moreover, we've seen research that highlights AI technologies, including Gen AI, that can generate up to $1 trillion in annual incremental value for the global banking industry. Right. So when you start talking about numbers that end in a T, it gets a lot of top leaders excited. So this value is really
Yeah.
coming from not just the cost reductions that we talked about, but the improved customer engagement. An example would be hyper personalized services, which has been something of focus for a long time. Now we're able to do things that we were never able to do before. Hyper personalization can boost customer retention rates by up to 20%. And the C suite's recognizing that and embracing generative AI, not just about staying competitive, but also unlocking really significant financial and operational benefits.
And I think it's interesting that one of the areas you pull out is the customer experience as well, because obviously there's a range of sectors that the researchers has brought out in terms of impact. So we not only have that customer experience and that retention point, there's also the internal experience in terms of how employees are interacting with their banks. There's risk management, there's modernization, there's a whole host of use cases. I guess I'd really like to go into, when we're talking about hyper personalized services and what they can do. Do you see that as one of the biggest areas of impact, or do you think, especially what the C-suite are seeing, I guess, do you think there's another area that banks are getting really excited about?
Yeah, I mean, in short, what I would say is it's all of those areas. So generative AI is going to impact every area of the bank, but
Hmm.
probably the largest quantifiable impact is going to be in the customer experience as well as then the risk management space. Um,
Yeah.
and I can give you a couple of examples of that. So if I maybe start on the customer experience space and what we're seeing there, banks leveraging AI powered chatbots and virtual assistants have seen up to 30 to 40% improvement in customer query response times, which really led to an increase in customer satisfaction scores as well by about 20 to 25%. So in the case of digital onboarding and personalized services, generative AI helps deliver 80% faster loan approval times at banks. And these banks are using AI to process up to 90% of the loan applications automatically. So those are a couple of maybe real world examples that are going on in the customer experience space. And then the other side of the coin that we were just talking about, the risk management side, generative AI's predictive capabilities in fraud detection and AML have shown that fraud can be detected with probably 85 to 90% accuracy now. Compare that to traditional methods that detected probably about 60 to 70% accuracy. So when you talk about risk management, that kind of call it 25% or so improvement's really a big deal when it comes to risk management. Implementing of AI and AML transaction monitoring also reduced false positives by 30 to 50%, cutting down a lot of the unnecessary human review times that are associated with some of the operational costs. So lots of benefits there, but I also don't want to make it sound like it's all roses. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about saying some of the ability to unlock these benefits doesn't also come with some real barriers. As banks are considering the rollout of Gen AI, consideration of governance is creating hesitation and angst as well. While there are various Gen AI regulatory frameworks already out there, there's more to come. So the banks really need to ensure they've got the appropriate governance frameworks within their enterprise risk organization that's aligned to those regulatory expectations. But not just on the regulatory side, each independent business unit needs to consider the governance from ideation all the way through the deployment, as well as not forget about the monitoring that happens after. So often our projects end up stopping at the implementation of a system. But when it comes to Gen AI and the ability for machines to learn, the ability to do the monitoring is also really important. So that's going to ensure that we've got second and third lines of defenses that are valid and aligned to policies, mitigate reputational risk, financial risk, regulatory risks at these institutions.
I think it's very interesting as well that you point out the regulatory side of things, because I know across the world we've been seeing a wide range of AI regulations. Like you say about the AI products, the regulations itself are in various stages of progression. So I'm sure a lot of banks will have been paying attention to the EU AI Act, which officially kind of came into force this summer. And there's SB 1047 in California, and just a whole host of kind of global frameworks. When you're speaking to banks, is that kind of approach to risk management and kind of the life cycle of their AI products, have you seen them kind of taking the lead from any of these frameworks, or I guess paying particular attention?
Yeah, I think they're paying attention to the frameworks that are already out there, but I would also say they're really in tune to other risks. So if you're using customer data to drive Gen AI, there's all sorts of regulation already on how can you use your customer data and the risk associated with that. So I think it's both on the regulatory frameworks that are out there, but I would also say the operational risks. And to your point previously about some of the peer pressure or watching what other banks are doing, there's a lot of discussion across the banks about how they're managing some of the governance and risk of this.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm sure there's a heated debate going on right now in many boardrooms. Do you think, and I want to revisit the point you made around some of the kind of incredible cost savings that AI can deliver as well. So there's, I guess on one hand, you have the new revenue streams that can be opened with AI, and on the other hand, you have the incredible kind of operational efficiencies that it can deliver. Do you think that's maybe played a role as well? So we've seen these kind of pilot projects in effect, but banks are also to a certain extent able to calculate a level of ROI that potentially wasn't as visible or as provable before.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the return that they're getting on the investment. So I think they've quickly moved out of pilot and experimental stage and into real implementations, and we're seeing them already live and generating. a lot of those tangible benefits that they can put real dollars associated with the return.
Mm. And I like the word you use there, tangible, as well, because one of I think the real kind of concrete pain points that AI has been, or Gen AI in particular, has been identified to solve is that the customer onboarding process, in terms of banks trying to bring customers on board and the time that can take, and the human man hours that it can consume. So, even today, it can take a major bank days to onboard a customer. Do you think this is one of the areas that could be a quick win for banks, using Gen AI to speed up the tasks across the KYC and AML compliance processes?
I definitely think that it can be a win for the bank. Yeah, you could debate the term whether it's a quick win or a win, but it is definitely a
A
win
slow
overall.
considered win.
Yeah, the use of Gen AI in automating KYC and AML processes can reduce the onboarding times by as much as 60 to 70%. So you can take what was a traditional week-long process and turn one into what's minutes. A lot of that obviously has to do with all the data on the back end and documentation on the back end. So common challenge that banks have with digital onboarding today is document validation. And banks implementing Gen AI for document validation and background checks have already started to report 35 to 40% cost reductions associated with what was manual compliance checks. So maybe giving an example of one of the largest global banks that has put these types of tools in place. They saw their KYC efficiency improve by 45 to 50%. So it's saving them millions of dollars annually through AI-driven automation. And I think one of the things that Gen AI is really good at is its ability to analyze unstructured data from a variety of sources, and that's going to allow it to enhance real-time risk assessment that reduces some of these compliance failures, talking 40 to 45%.
All right, next up, let's look at payments as a particular use case and area for Gen AI driven improvement. So, payments in particular is a big focus for NTT Data this year, and it's one of the issues banks face most in terms of the fragmented nature of payment systems. So, Jason, how can Gen AI help solve this? And I believe this is a term you've brought up before, which is the spaghetti diagram problem, in terms of creating a more cohesive payment infrastructure.
Yeah, so the notorious spaghetti diagram that we talked
Mm.
about previously, it really relates to the bank's legacy applications that they've built over decades. And a lot of times those get built in silos, which creates this web of integration across all applications. So fragmentation in the payment space is a widespread challenge. Banks have legacy systems that are handling different aspects of the payment ecosystem or different types of payment types, right? If you think about ACH, SWIFT, real-time payments, a lot of times it's different systems and those create inefficiencies. So generative AI can address this by helping banks develop a much more cohesive infrastructure. Really, probably two ways that I'd highlight that Gen AI is doing this. One is through process standardization and integration. The other is through interoperability. Um, so I'll take those maybe kind of one by one. And process standardization and integration, AI can analyze the separate data from various payment systems to suggest harmonized workflows. Gen AI models can be employed to automate reconciliation across payment networks, reducing manual intervention and errors by up to 70%. This not only reduces the operational overhead, but also speeds up end-to-end payment processes by 30 to 40%. So going back to what we were talking about earlier about this is not just about cost savings, it's about customer experience. If you talk about speeding up the end-to-end payment process by 30 to 40%, real benefit for the customers. Um,
Yeah.
the second one I brought up was the interoperability. So AI-based solutions can be used to create middleware that bridges gaps between legacy systems. And that's making it possible for these systems to actually talk together. This improves interoperability across systems that reduces maintenance costs. And we've seen places where we think that maintenance costs can be reduced by 20 to 30%. And it's not just theoretical either. We're actually seeing this at banks and in production today. It's a leading European bank that we work with, and they've used AI to consolidate its payments gateway, achieving an estimated 25% reduction in their payment processing times. That's also led to a 15% improvement in straight through processing rates, and ultimately reducing the complexity and the risk of failed transactions. So, real life examples that are out there.
Mm.
And then would also, highlight that, when it comes to modernizing these systems and re-engineering the legacy applications, Gen AI plays a role in that as well. It can analyze the usage of payment applications to provide insights to which applications are either redundant altogether or maybe just underutilized. And this can help in rationalizing legacy systems and eliminating unnecessary applications and consolidating payment platforms.
I think it's those are all great use cases, and it's interesting as well pointing out in terms of the use cases where we've been through some of the more, I guess, obvious and these more customer facing areas. So we have the customer experience, the employee experience, the more fraud detection points. But I guess it's really worth underlining the level to which Gen AI can be used as an enabler of infrastructure and middleware and all of these kind of in between areas where banks can really save on manual time. I guess that's maybe one of the areas that can be overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, I think it really does help with those efficiencies, right? And we could keep going back to the the phrase "human plus machine," but I think that's where
Mm.
the real opportunity happens. It's not that we're eliminating what needs to happen from an operational perspective, but we're really making it more efficient through the use of these technologies.
And yeah, and I think efficiency's really been the watchword of this episode in terms of trying to rationalize different processes, different platforms, sort of bring all of this tangled network of siloed systems into line. When we're looking at all of this customer information that banks can use Gen AI to bring together, why do you think it is so important for banks to have this single view of their customers? I think particularly when it comes to payments.
Yeah, I think it's always been a priority for banks to have a single customer view or at least a unified view of customers. And that's critical to optimize their payment offerings and understand customer behavior and needs. Without a unified view, banks face issues such as duplicated customer profiles or inaccurate transaction tracking. It could create missed opportunities for cross selling or fraud detection. So there's a lot of reasons why I think it's crucial. I'll give a couple of those. I mentioned fraud detection. Unified view allows banks to better track payment behavior, which really is essential for identifying activity that's deviating from a customer's normal behavior and reducing fraud risks. Um, Studies have shown that banks that are using those AI-driven customer views are already reporting 50 to 60% reduction in some of the false positives for fraud alerts. Keeps them from having to track down, things that really weren't legitimate.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm going to keep going back a bit to the customer experience side of this as well, because I think so often we focus on efficiencies or we focus on cost reduction, but the customer experience piece to me is really exciting. And when it comes to a single view, um, it enhances the customer service by providing real-time insights into their transaction history, their payment preferences, potential pain points that they may have. This can really improve some of the resolution times for, say, payment disputes. We've seen payment disputes that resolution time can be cut by, say, a third, and leading to higher satisfaction levels anytime that you can resolve a customer issue 30 to 40% faster than what you were able to do before. And we talked about personalization, right, and hyper personalization,
Hmm.
but the holistic understanding of a customer's payment preference, banks can offer tailored products like personalized loans, better credit terms, or real-time payment solutions. And every time that you boost that kind of customer satisfaction and can do some of those things, you can also boost customer retention. So we believe that you can boost customer retention by 20 to 25% through some of this better personalization.
I think it's worth pausing here to point out that, in our research, and you said, let's keep going back to customer experience, because despite the operational efficiencies companies can draw from Gen AI, it is that real impact on customers that improves retention. That when we surveyed banks, I believe 44% said that one of the top improvements that they've seen using Gen AI was around that improved and automated customer support and engagement, where, and even just from an anecdotal basis, people you see when they've seen how banks can use these tools in practice, it really is bringing the difference directly to the customer. And that, I think, that level of personalization is huge when we look at the text generation capabilities and things in that area. And I think as well, just looking back at all of these different areas, so I've spoken about fraud detection, customer experience, personalization, all of these, I guess, have that common thread of pattern matching. So when we're looking at I guess, where the technological meets the real life in terms of AI's strength in, identifying, learning, repeating patterns, and then these use cases where that's a perfect match. Do we think this is a case where experts can really help banks find the areas in which Gen AI is best suited for their, I guess, individual data? Because obviously all banks have different types of data sets and ways to really bring that data into action.
I think it goes across all the banks. And so, yeah, I think that leveraging the data that's already in the banks, but doing so in a way that's new and powerful
Mm.
is, going to unlock a lot of these capabilities that we're talking about. So I don't think that's going to be unique to individual banks as much as it's going to be across the industry. But you brought up the data point, and the data quality that's in the banks is going to be really important for the solution, and how much value it can have, but also the old garbage in, garbage out, is equally true with Gen AI, and maybe more so in Gen AI. So the banks that have the best data governance and best data quality capabilities are going to be the ones that see the biggest, or at least the fastest, return on Gen AI capabilities.
Definitely. I guess, have you, from a first-hand perspective, have you seen maybe more interest or awareness from banks in terms of making sure their data is in the right shape, that they've got all the correct processes and pipelines set up in order to feed these applications and models, now that there is such a focus on the data?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is maybe not necessarily the standalone focus, but integrated with these types of projects. They understand that to be able to unlock the value, they've got to have the data at a point where it really can help them optimize the solution. So I think what we see now is not necessarily a standalone program around data quality in the banks, but integrating the focus on that as we explore, which of these capabilities that we're looking at, whether it's on the customer experience side or on the operational side.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I guess, a really strong theme that's emerged here is in terms of how banks can not only consolidate data to improve the output of their AI models, but I know one thing you've mentioned earlier is also about consolidating customer data using advanced AI and machine learning systems. So have you perhaps seen any banks that are, using platforms or other forms of AI to kind of consolidate this data and provide a unified customer view?
Um, Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier. These solutions are not just in sight, right? We're not just working on them as future, but I think the solutions are emerging through advanced AI, machine learning systems that are helping consolidate customer data across all sorts of channels. So some of the large banks have already deployed, these AI powered platforms. They enabled a single view of the customer that we were talking about by aggregating data from multiple payment points, CRMs, core banking platforms. Um, and yeah, I think it is real. Go back to a different example, because I know it's always nice to talk about, what are we actually seeing live and in production. But one of the large global European banks introduced an AI-driven customer data platform that reduced their customer onboarding times by almost half. It also improved payment fraud detection by another 40%. So there are real solutions out there. Banks are using them, and they're providing them with a unified customer view that enhances a lot of different aspects, including the more secure payment ecosystem that we've been talking about.